This is Paul Berkobin with Elk Spring Education, your place for real estate and financial know-how. And today, we're doing an Elk Spring tidbit on the process of home ownership, and in particular, ways to reduce the cash needed to own a home. And so, there's lots of reasons to think about reducing the cash needed to own a home. For some folks, it's just not having much cash. It'd be nice to reduce the amount needed, right? A lot of people who are renting and want to get into home ownership, it can help to get into home ownership sooner if you need less cash. You don't have to save as much. But reducing the cash needed to own a home is also great for folks with significant assets. Often there's more intelligent places to put assets. It can also be important for folks with debt. You know, it may be better to put assets towards paying off debt rather than putting into a home. So there's many different reasons why reducing the cash needed to own a home can be smart. You know, even from the most basic investing principle of leverage, the less cash that you put into a property as it appreciates, the better return you have on the cash you put in. So many reasons to think about that. Anyway, there's four common strategies that are used to reduce the cash needed. And in this tidbit, we're just going to talk about each of them briefly to give you a sense of what they are. So the first one is seller credit. And seller credit doesn't always work. It generally will not work if you're in a competitive market. If you're in competition for a home, this is not a great strategy. But if you're not in competition, this can work well. Seller credit is basically where you increase the sales price to include closing costs, and then have the seller pay them. And this is basically a way of financing your closing costs. So basically, all you're doing is you're increasing the sales price to include closing costs. And that's basically what a seller credit is. Again, that doesn't work if you're in competition on a home, but if you're not in competition, it's a great strategy. There's limits on seller credit. You know, if you're buying a house for $300 grand, you couldn't bump the sales price to $400 grand, get $100,000 back, right? There's limits that loan programs have. But the general point is that you usually can use those to cover the closing costs, basically. In most cases, many loan programs, you can at least have a seller credit cover closing costs, to speak approximately. Again, the way to really fine-tune this is to talk to a great consulting lender who's licensed in the area where you want to own a home for what the specific limits and strategies are. But that's basically how that works. Here's the second one. This is not a major cash saver, but it's a neat one. End of month closing. Basically, the reason that this works is that when you have a mortgage, you pay interest to the end of the month that you close in, right? So however many days there are in the month, you know, if you start on the first of a month with a closing, you would actually pay per diem interest all the way to the end of that month. Whereas if you closed on the last day of the month, you just pay 1 day of per diem interest. So depending on the size of the loan that you're working with, that interest can be substantial. It could add up to a lot of money. And just controlling the closing date would have that effect. Now, the interest that you pay is not extra, right? You're just paying for time that you own the home. And the reason that this is done is because in the mortgage industry, mortgages are always due on the first of the month with a 15-day grace period. And so they've got to get the loan falling on that cycle, basically. So anyway, end of month closing can save a nice little chunk of cash, especially if the loan size you're working with is larger. So then the third one is to choose a low closing cost program. So there are loan programs that have higher costs, and there's loan programs that have lower costs. And so the two main areas that this shows itself is in whether or not you pay points on a mortgage and whether or not you're paying for mortgage insurance. So those two things are areas where you can reduce closing costs. Points are basically just a way of reducing the rate on a mortgage, and they're always a choice. So you always have a choice about whether you want to pay those or not. A lender can express the fees on a loan in either cash or in rate, and it's a choice. So one of the best things you can do early in your process is to find a great consulting lender to go through the options that you're going to have in terms of rate versus fee. And in particular, you have a choice about whether you pay these things or not. The reason you might want to pay points is that they reduce the rate on a mortgage, But if you're trying to conserve cash, you might choose not to pay them and just have a slightly higher rate and keep your cash. Same thing with mortgage insurance. There are frequently ways that you can buy that out, finance it in some cases. There's different options with how that works. That's another area where you can just reduce the cash that's needed up front. So finding a great consulting lender and exploring the ways of reducing cash needed through the choice of loan program, and I would even say, loan structure, right? Those two things is a great thing to do before you get into the market for a home, right? Hand in hand with that goes low money down programs, and so there are a number of mortgage programs that allow for low money down. And again, doing some research before you get too far into the market is a great idea with the consulting lender. So there are programs in many parts of the country where you can put 0 down on homes now, 3% on conventional loans for many people, 3.5% on FHA. There are even options frequently to do a first plus a second mortgage and put nothing down. Many different structures that can reduce the cash in terms of the loan program. So really, your 4 top strategies are, if you're not in competition, maybe use a seller of credit to finance closing costs. Number 2, control the closing date, so you save a little bit of money there in terms of interest needed. Number 3 is talk to your consulting lender about low closing cost options. A really great example of this is even the idea of what's called a lender credit, where you increase the rate even a bit more and the lender pays you money. Okay, so talk to your lender about low closing cost programs. And then number 4 is low down payment loan programs, right? Low down payment programs. Those are the 4 things that can dramatically reduce the cash that you might think you need and really get things to the point that probably work for you right where you are without too much trouble at all. So financialpro.info is the URL here. I just want to ask you to take just a couple moments to do 2 quick feedback questions. If you just go there, there's some things you can request there too, including the report about how to put less than 20% down and never pay PMI, which is a great one. And that's there at financialpro.info. That's our tidbit. Thanks.